Hello students, welcome back. This is Mrs. Mercado speaking. In this lecture we are going to be covering chapter 19, which deals with support department and joint cost allocation. This is accounting 2402, principles of managerial accounting. I hope all of you are doing wonderful. You're keeping up with your assignments. Remember, if you have any questions, don't keep the questions to yourself. I'm here to help you in whatever I can. Please reach out to me so I can clarify any questions you might have. Okay. Now, this particular chapter deals with support departments, and these are basically departments that are not directly involved in the production process, but they provide some sort of service necessary for making the products. Okay. All of the direct costs of a support department are traced to the department, and indirect general factory overhead is distributed to the support department. Okay. Both direct and indirect support department costs are considered indirect costs, which are your manufacturing overhead of production, and these costs are subsequently allocated to the production departments. So this particular chapter entails having support departments and allocating whatever is it that's spent on specific support departments based on an allocation method to other departments. Okay, so there are basically three commonly used methods for allocating support department costs to production departments or support activity costs to production activities, and these are the direct method, the sequential method, and the reciprocal services method. Now, it's very important that before you begin working on your assignments, that you read the chapter, you analyze the information, the diagrams being presented in the ebook. They provide very useful resources as to how to complete your assignments. Right now, I'm gonna begin working on some of these problems. I'm just gonna dive in. It is the student's responsibility to read the chapter. Remember, my lectures are more problem solving focused. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the first problem that I'm going to cover this particular in this particular lecture. This is basic exercise 19.3. Okay, so basic exercise 19.3 deals with support department cost allocation using the reciprocal services method. Okay, so it says Brewster Toy Makers produces toys for children. The toys are produced in the molding and assembly departments. The janitorial and security departments support the production of the toys. So, the janitorial and the security departments have no impact on the actual manufacturing process of the toys, but they are necessary to be able to, for the operation purposes. The janitorial department is cleaning, the security department is maybe overlooking that everything's okay. So, yes, they are not needed to produce the good, but they are a support department that is needed to run the overall operations of the business. Okay, so the janitorial and security department support the production of the toys. Costs from the janitorial department are allocated based on square feet. Okay, costs from the security department are allocated based on asset value. And it's always very important when we're working a problem, we identify the allocation drivers. And in this case, for the janitorial department, we're looking at square feet. For the security department, we're looking at the asset value. Okay, relevant department information, is provided in the following table. Okay, and then they give you the janitorial department, security department. These are your support departments, and then we have the molding department and the assembly department, and these are the actual departments that assemble the toys. Okay, we have information dealing with square feet, asset value, and department cost. It says, using the reciprocal services method of support department cost allocation, determine A, the percentage of janitorial costs that should be allocated to the security department, and B, the percentage of the security costs that should be allocated to the janitorial department. Okay, I went back and I included from the textbook what a reciprocal services method is, and it's basically a method of allocating support department costs to production departments that considers all inter-support department services. Okay, so it's important to note, it was highlighted in your book, that support departments never allocate their own costs to themselves. Okay, so if whatever was spent on the security department, that gets distributed to the other departments. They don't get, they're not allocated their own for their own portion of, whatever is it that they service they provided. Okay, so the first requirement says, determine the percentage of janitorial cost that should be allocated to the security department. Okay, so when we are allocating here, they're asking us to allocate janitorial cost. Okay, so let me put here allocation of janitorial costs. Okay, so because we are allocating janitorial cost is not going to be included here, because remember, we don't allocate our own costs to ourselves. So if I'm allocating my janitorial costs, I'm going to allocate these costs to the other three departments, which is my security, molding, and assembly. So I went ahead and I set them up. Now it says here that the janitorial department is allocated based on square feet. Okay, the square feet are provided for each department. Okay, so we're going to look at the square feet for the security department. That's 1,600. We're going to look at the square feet for the molding department. That is 1,600. And we're going to look at the square feet for the assembly department. That is $4,800. 4,800 square feet, I'm sorry. So I'm going to add that to see how many square feet in total we have. Okay, and remember, we are excluding the janitorial cost because we don't allocate our own cost. Okay, so we have 8,000 square feet that we're going to be allocating our cost to. Okay, now we need to get a percentage or a proportion of how much does each department utilize based on my total square feet. Okay, so we're gonna get the proportion. Okay, so to get the proportion, you're gonna get the amount of square feet for that particular department that you're doing, and you're gonna divide it by the total square feet. Okay, so it's your department square feet divided by the total square feet. So that means that the security department uses up 20% of the square feet that is cleaned up by the janitorial department. We're going to do the same thing for molding. The amount of square feet in the molding department divided by the total square feet, that gives me 20%. And the assembly department, I've got 4,800 square feet divided by 8,000. Okay, so all I did right here was I brought in the square feet from my problem right here. Okay, and I said, okay, I need to figure out how much am I going to allocate to the security, molding, and assembly department. Well, I'm going to make my allocation based on square feet. So I need to figure out the proportion of square feet per department. And we do that by getting our square feet per the department divided by the total. Okay, so they're asking you, using the reciprocal services method, determine the percentage of janitorial costs that should be allocated to the security department. So they're asking us about the security department. Okay, so the percentage that we are going to be allocating is 20%. Okay, we did for all three of them, which is awesome in case they ask you for any other. But in this particular case, they're only asking you for the percentage of janitorial costs that are going to be allocated to the security department, and that would be 20%. Okay. If they were to have asked you, well, how much are you going to allocate to the assembly department, then the assembly department would have been 60%. Okay, and the percentage or the proportion allocated is based on the number of square feet that they have. Okay. Now, for letter B, it says determine the percentage of security costs that should be allocated to the janitorial department. Okay, so now here, let me insert another line right there. Excuse me. We're going to do the allocation of security cost. Security costs. Okay, So now, because I'm allocating my security costs, I'm going to allocate my security costs to the other three departments, which is my janitorial, molding, and assembly. Now it says here that costs related to the security department are allocated based on asset value. Okay, so we're going to look at our asset value for the janitorial department. That's 200. For the molding department, that's 1800. And for the assembly department, that's 2000. Okay, so where am I picking up those? I'm picking up those from right here. Oh, sorry, I put a insert shapes right here. Okay, so in this one, we're looking at no fill. We're looking at asset value. And remember, we do not allocate our own costs, so we're going to exclude security, and we're only going to distribute to janitorial, molding, and assembly. Okay, so now I'm going to get my total. Okay, and now I'm going to get the proportion. Okay, what's the proportion of my asset value? Well, I'm going to get my asset value for the janitorial department divided by my total asset value. That's going to give me 5%. I'm going to do the same thing for molding. I've got an asset value of 1800 divided by my total asset value of 4000. That gives me 45%. I'm going to get my asset value for the assembly divided by my total. Okay. Just put here total that way. Okay. So, what are they asking us in letter B? What is the percentage of security costs that we're going to allocate to the janitorial department? Well, they're asking us how much are we going to allocate to the janitorial department. We're going to allocate 5% of my cost to the janitorial department. Okay, we calculated it for all of them, so we went an extra mile. But that way you have all of your data handy. When I'm doing these analysis, I like to do it for all of the information that I have. That way you get it over and done with, because right now they might be asking you, well, how much are we going to allocate to janitorial? Well, it's 5%. What about molding? Oh, well, sir, you didn't tell me to calculate molding. Okay, when we're working out in the workforce, it's very important to always have all of our available information in front of us. That way, if we get questioned, we have the information right there. Okay, but the items highlighted are the ones that we are going to be responding to. Letter A will be 20% for security. Letter B will be 5% for janitorial. Okay, pretty straightforward. All we're doing is we're getting the total of our specific driver and then getting the proportion based on the information provided. Okay, and then we just need to make sure that that gives us 100%, and it does. Okay. So that is the first basic exercise. Very simple. Okay. The next one we have is BE 19.4. Okay. So this one is a joint cost allocation with physical units method. So it says Blake's Blacksmith Company produces two types of shotguns, a 12 gauge and a 20 gauge. The shotguns are made through a joint production process that ultimately produces 30 12 gauge shotguns and 20 20 gauge shotguns and costs a total of $4,000 per batch. So we're working out a problem. We need to be very clear at what we're reading. So what they've just told us here is that we manufacture these two types of shotguns in batches, okay, and that we spend $4,000 in the batch. And within that batch, we had 12 gauge shotgun. We had how many? We had we produced 30 12 gauge shotguns and 20 20 gauge shotguns. Okay, so after the split off point, once they do whatever it is that they're going to do to those shotguns, they split them off. Okay, and then each type of shotgun goes through an additional crafting process before it's sold. Okay, so they do, once they manufacture the shell of the shotgun or whatever it is that they do, they send it to another process where they kind of like customize it. Okay, the additional production process of the 12 gauge shotgun costs $30 per gun, after which it is sold for $180 per gun. The additional production process of the 20 gauge shotgun costs $25 per gun, after which is sold for $150 per gun. Now, Very important. Look at what they're asking. Determine the amount of the joint production cost. Joint production cost allocated to each type of shotgun using the physical units method. Okay, so here the key is determine the amount of joint production cost. How much did you spend in that joint production? I don't care what happened after, when we split it off into the crafting process. I don't care about that. I just care about when we were processing it in the batch. So what happens when students are working this problem is they want to use all of the information provided. And we don't need to use all of the information. They gave you that information to throw you off. All we need to focus on is joint production cost. Okay, so let's look at that. So we have our 12 gauge and our 20 gauge shotguns. Okay, so how many 12 gauge shotguns do we produce per batch? So it says here that in the joint production process, we produce 30 12 gauge shotguns. Okay, so we have 30 per batch, and we produce 20 gauge shotguns. Okay, so in total, in every batch, we produce 50 shotguns. Okay, that's what we have. We produce 30 of the 20 gauge, 20 of the 20 gauge, a total of 50. Now once we have that, we can get the proportion. What's the proportion of 12 gauge shotguns versus 20 gauge shotguns? Well, we're going to get our guns per batch divided by our total number of guns produced in that batch. Okay, that's going to give me 60% for the 12 gauge. We're going to get the 20 gauge shotgun. How many do we produce per batch? We produce 20 divided by my total, and that's 40. Okay, so we have a proportion of 60-40. Okay, in that one batch, we produce 60% are made out of 12 gauge shotguns, 40% are made out of 20 gauge shotguns. Okay, now what else does it tell us? It tells us here that the costs are a total of $4,000 per batch. So in this batch of 50 guns, I am spending $4,000. Okay, and it's $4,000 in total. Okay, so it's $4,000 in total. I'm just going to do here, this is my driver, this is my cost, which is $4,000. I'm going to do that there. Okay, now I'm going to allocate my cost. Well, I know that I spend $4,000 per batch, right? I know that 60% of those guns that I produce are the 12 gauge guns. How much am I going to allocate to my 12 gauge shotgun? So what we're going to do is we're going to get our $4,000 cost. That is how much we spend in the batch. And I'm going to multiply it by the percentage of how much production it is for the 12 gauge shotgun. And that's going to give me $2,400. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I spend $4,000 in my batch, and my 12 gauge shotgun represents 40% of my production. Okay. Okay. So in this one batch of 50 guns, I spend $4,000, and I'm going to allocate $2,400 to my 12 gauge, and I'm going to allocate $1,600 to my 20 gauge. And I did this allocation based on the production of my guns. I produce more 12 gauge than 20 gauge, so the 12 gauge are going to have a higher cost allocation. Okay, so pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of selecting the information that you need for this particular problem so you can be able to solve it. Like I said, they give you a whole bunch of split off point cost, how much they sell the guns for. None of that pertains to our problem. Our problem is very simple. They're just asking you, what is the amount of joint production cost allocated for each shotgun? Okay, and we know how many shotguns are produced per batch. We get the proportion by getting the amount of shotguns prepared or produced divided by the total. That gives us a proportion. And then we multiply our proportion times our cost, which is $4,000 per batch, and that's going to give us our allocation. Okay, so this is what we're going to allocate. We're going to allocate $2,400 to the 12 gauge, $1,600 to the 20 gauge. Okay, so that is our second exercise that we're doing. This is BE 19-4. Okay, so now we're going to the exercise 19-1. Okay. Okay, so let's see what we have. So it says this is a support department cost allocation using the direct method. Yodown Incorporated produces yogurt. Information related to the company's yogurt production follows. So then we have three departments, production department 1, 2, and 3, and then we have the support department cost driver. Okay, now they're telling us here support department's 1 cost total to $142,000. That is how much we spend in support department 1. Using the direct method of support department cost allocation, determine the cost from support department 1 that should be allocated to each production department. Okay, so we have support department 1, and then we have 3 production departments, and we have to allocate those $142,000 to my 3 production departments. Okay, so we're gonna have production department 1, production department 2, and production department 3. Okay. Okay, and we have this support department cost driver that is provided here. 1,400, 100, and 500 for each respective department. Okay, so we're gonna get those drivers. We're gonna just bring them in there, and we're gonna get our total. Okay, now we're gonna get the proportion. Remember, how do we get the proportion? We get the driver divided by the total. Okay, the driver divided by the total. Okay, and that's going to give us our proportion. Now, the cost. It says here that we, the support department costs a total of $142,000. Okay, $142,000. That is my cost for my support department. So I'm going to put here support department cost. Okay, $142,000. So I have to allocate those $142,000 into these 3 production departments. I've already calculated the proportion based on my cost driver right here. So to get my allocation, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get my cost times my percentage in proportion. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. The cost times the proportion for the production department 2. Department 3, cost times proportion for production department 3. And that will give us a total. So remember, our total cost that we're trying to distribute is $142,000. How am I going to distribute that? Well, I got my proportions based on my cost drivers. So once I have my proportions, I can just multiply my proportion times my cost to get my allocation. Okay, so for the department 1, I'm going to allocate $99,400 of my support department cost. For production department 2, I'm going to allocate $7,100. And for department 3, I'm going to allocate $35,500. Okay, so remember, you get your driver, calculate your proportion. Once you have that identified, you multiply your proportion times your cost that you're trying to split up into the different departments, and that's going to give you your allocation. Okay, so remember, in this case, we talked about the direct method, which basically is a method to allocate all support department costs directly to production departments without considering the services provided between service departments. Okay. Now, this last exercise that you're going to be having, exercise 19.7, you're going to have something similar to this on your test. Okay. This problem deals with support department cost allocation using the direct method. Okay, so it reads, Becker Tabletops has two support departments. We have the janitorial and the cafeteria, and two production departments, the cutting and the assembly. Relevant details of these departments are as follows. Okay, so then we have the information of the two support departments. We have janitorial and cafeteria. The cost driver for the janitorial is based on number of square feet being serviced. The cafeteria is based on the number of employees. Okay, and then we have our department costs, our square feet, and our number of employees for our janitorial, cafeteria, cutting, and assembly departments. Okay, now be very careful with what they're asking. They're asking us to allocate the support department costs only to the production departments using the direct method. So which are my two production departments? My production departments are the cutting and the assembly. Okay, my janitorial and my cafeteria are my support departments. Okay, so they're asking us to allocate the support department cost, okay, to the production department using the direct method. So the first cost that we're going to allocate is my janitorial cost. Okay, we have two support departments. We have two support costs that we need to allocate. Okay, so the first one, the janitorial department. It says here that the janitorial department costs are allocated based on square footage. Okay, so we're going to figure out our square footage for the production departments, which is my cutting and my assembly. Okay, so for the cutting, I have 1,000. For the assembly, I've got 4,000. Those are my square feet. Okay, and I'm looking at right here. Okay, so let's put the square feet. For cutting, I have 1,000. For assembly, I've got 4,000. Okay, and we're going to get our total. Okay, and we need the total to be able to calculate our proportion. Okay, now that we've got our total, I can calculate my proportion, which is going to be the number of square feet for the cutting department divided by the total number of square feet for both production departments, and that's going to give me 20%. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for the assembly department. We're going to get our square feet divided by our total square feet. That's going to give me 20 and 80%. So my proportion is 20% for cutting, 80% assembly. Okay. Now, what is my department cost? How much did I spend in my janitorial department? In my janitorial department, I spent $310,000. Okay, that is how much you spent in your janitorial department. That is what you're trying to allocate to your production departments. Okay, so my cost was $310,000. Okay, now that I know my total cost, I can obtain my allocation. And how do we do that? Well, you get your department cost times your proportion for that particular department, in this case the cutting department. That gives me $62,000. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for the assembly department. We're going to get the $310,000 times 80%, and that's going to give me $248,000. Okay, so now I had $310,000 in janitorial department costs, which we had there, that needed to be allocated to my two production departments, which were cutting and assembly. So what did we do? We got the number of square feet for these two departments. We calculated the proportion. Once we got the proportion, we identified the department costs that we are wanting to allocate. In this case, it's for janitorial, the $310,000. And you multiply the department cost times the proportion to get your allocation. Okay. We are going to do the same thing. So this is what we're allocating. We're allocating $62,000 to of janitorial costs to the cutting department. We're allocating $248,000 of janitorial costs to my assembly department. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to allocate my second support department, which is my cafeteria department. Okay, and the cafeteria department is allocated based on the number of employees. Okay, so remember, we're allocating our cafeteria cost, which is a support department, to our actual production departments, which are our cutting and assembly. Okay, so we need to identify how many employees do we have in each of those departments. Okay, and here we have it. Okay, let me see. So I've got 30 and I've got 10. Okay, I've got a total of 40 employees. Okay, so now that I've got my total employees, I can get my proportion, which is going to be the number of employees for cutting divided by the total number of employees. That gives you 75%. You're going to do the same thing for assembly. The number of employees divided by the total. That gives me 25%. Okay. So, what's my department cost for the cafeteria? Okay. So for my cafeteria, my cost is $169. That is why that's what I need to allocate out to the two production departments. So my cost is $169,000. Okay. Now that I know my cost, I can calculate my allocation. Okay, so it's going to be your department cost times your allocation for each of the two departments. Department cost times the allocation. Okay. That gives you the $169,000. So the $169 spent on the cafeteria department is going to be allocated to the cutting and assembly department, and they're going to get split $126,750 for cutting and $42,250 for assembly. So it's the same process. The ebook goes through a series of long steps. After analyzing the information, I just thought it was easier and shorter for me to explain it this other way. You get the same results. It's just a matter of first calculating your proportion. Once you get your proportion, identifying the cost for the department that you're allocating the cost from. And then you just multiply the department cost times the proportion to get the allocation. Okay. Remember, you're going to have a problem similar to this on your test. So it's very important that you know how to work this problem. Okay. I want to thank you all for the great work that you've been doing so far. I am very pleased with your, continuous dedication to the class, for completing your assignments every week, for asking questions, for communicating with me if something is going on in your life and you're not being able to meet deadlines. I really appreciate it. I wish I was teaching the class face to face so I could get to see you all. But right now, we're doing online classes. And because we are doing online classes, please do not feel intimidated by the class. I know it can be a little bit challenging, but any questions you have, please feel free to contact me during my office hours or send me a Blackboard message or an email, and I'll be glad to respond. Just make sure that if you do send me an email, you do include your name and the class that you're in. That way I am able to respond to you timely. Okay, so that is basically it for the for this particular lecture dealing with chapter 19. Until next time, and take good care of yourself. Bye bye.